Thank you. My name is Jamie Jang, and I'm going to share with you those who inspire us. Ed Mazria, who's the 2021 AIA Gold Medal winner. So we're going to look a little bit at his work. Again, I'm Jamie Jang. I'm an associate AIA member. I'm an architecture associate at Jang Architect, my father's residential firm in Redwood City. I actually have no degree in architecture yet. My undergraduate is in environmental studies, and so you'll probably see why Ed Mazria is an inspiration to me. Just to cover his early life, Ed Mazria was born in New York, Brooklyn. He graduated from the Pratt Institute with architecture, and then he was drafted into the NBA by the New York Knicks. He declined to go to the NBA and instead joined the Peace Corps and went to Peru. He's said that he discovered that it was in Peru that architecture is responsible and key to both social and environmental improvement. When he returned from the Peace Corps, he worked for Edward Larrabee Barnes. He moved to New Mexico and received his master's in architecture. And then he moved on to teach at the University of Oregon, where he focused on solar energy research. This is not his building, but it is at U of O, and it really shows a great capture, I think, of solar energy for the enjoyment of space, and then also for the PV that you can see up there. This is his work, though. This is his book. His research at U of O led to his capstone book, the Passive Solar Energy book. That's a picture of my copy of the book that I bought used online for about $4, I think. And the book has been translated into 5 languages, and it has sold over 1 million copies. We're going to look a little bit at the book. You know, it's published in 1979, so it has all these really cool hand-drawn graphics that, you know, visually represent a lot of the passive strategies. And I'm just pouring through it every morning. I sit in the morning sun while I read this book, and not done with it yet, but it does have patterns. It's really cool. He's, you know, he quotes Christopher Alexander a couple times, and there's 27 patterns in this book. It starts with building location, then building shape and orientation. It addresses what to do with the north side, and you know, basically how to choose your system and size your system, and it's all really digestible for technical, to me, technical stuff about passive solar, and I'm really enjoying it. Here's just some other images showing about, you know, an attached greenhouse and how you can take advantage of that to passively heat and cool your building. Gonna briefly touch, actually, yeah, only briefly, his architecture. So after working at U of O and studying solar, he went and applied all his research in his own architecture firm. He went to New Mexico. The climate of New Mexico is really great for passive solar strategies. You can use thermal masses to heat your building during the winter. And then because the sun changes, you can use those same thermal masses to cool your building during the summer. And the sunlight is pretty dependable. So there's a few nice projects here. There's more in his portfolio, but I just wanted to showcase some of my favorites: the Stockbrand residence in Albuquerque, the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, and then the Rio Grande Botanic Garden Conservatory. So the part that really speaks most to me from Ed Mazria is his activism. He's actually one of the founding members of the COAT committee, AIA's Committee on the Environment. So he founded that in the 90s. And then in 2003, he really kind of landed on the map as an architecture activist with his article in Metropolis magazine called "It's the Architecture, Stupid." In that article, he displayed energy consumption data through an architectural lens. So when you look at the chart on the left, that's kind of typically what the US EPA will categorize our energy consumption as. So you see industry industry seems to be the most important factor here, and then you have transportation as the second most important, and then you have commercial and residential. But what Mazria did is he dug into the data of industry, and he was able to isolate out how much industry is related to construction. And then he did the simple mental math of adding up residential and commercial and calling all of that architecture or the built environment. And when you look at the data that way, the built environment was responsible for pretty much half of US energy consumption in 2003. And so by taking a closer look at this, a more critical eye, Mazria accurately asked architects and builders to take responsibility for energy and climate. Ever since then, he's kind of been on an information campaign. And it's this 20 years of raising awareness that earned him the AIA gold medal last year, last December. So he's been speaking publicly for 2 decades about this. He created a nonprofit called Architecture 2030. That nonprofit issued the 2030 Challenge, which now serves as the model for the AIA 2030 commitment. Also, because of his research, Mazria was asked to present to the UN and inform the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. And right now, a big thing that he's working on, or Architecture 2030 is working on, is the Zero Code, which is an optional appendix to the IECC and ASHRAE building codes. They also have a Zero Code for California, so an appendix that can be added to Title 24. And basically, if adopted, this code requires new major construction to be net zero energy. And they do this with a creative process where they allow a structure of that would be held to the Zero Code to basically procure renewable energy off-site if needed, right? So they could pay into community solar, or they could develop their own PVs, some distance away, and that would be contributing to that building's net zero status. If you are interested in this at all, I would urge you to join the advocacy committee. The advocacy committee is working on Zero Code advocacy right now, and we could definitely use more human resources. But I think that if Ed Mazria knew I was doing a presentation on him, he would really hope that I imparted you with some of this information. And as someone with an environmental studies degree, I understand that this might not be enjoyable, but it's really important. So he would bring up a carbon budget, which is basically the amount of CO2 that the globe can emit before reaching certain thresholds within a certain confidence level. So if we were to follow the Paris Climate Agreement, then we would emit 600 gigatons of CO2. But if we want a 2/3 chance of remaining below 1.5 degrees warming, then as of January 1st, 2020, we have 340 gigatons of CO2 remaining in our carbon budget. So clearly the Paris Climate Agreement isn't good enough. As a globe, we emit approximately 40 gigatons of CO2 per year. So what do we need to do? Well, if you believe Ed Mazria, who believes the scientists, then we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 65% by 2030, and then achieve zero emissions by 2040. Which is really astounding, honestly. Further astounding bits of data here. Transportation is responsible for 23% of global emissions. The building sector is responsible for 40%. By 2060, the world is expected to double its current building stock. That's 2.5 trillion square feet of new building space. Or put in other terms, that's a whole entire New York City added to the planet every 34 days for the next 40 years. The embodied carbon, which is the amount of carbon it costs to bring materials to the site, the embodied carbon of concrete, steel, and aluminum accounts for 22.7% of all CO2 emissions. Cities are responsible for 66% of energy consumption and 70% of energy-related CO2 emissions. And then, like I said before, we have to reduce our emissions by 65% by 2030 and 100% by 2040. Otherwise, we start to reach these dangerous tipping points and biodiversity collapse. So I'm going to close with a quote from Ed Mazria, or actually it's at the end of his Metropolis magazine article. The American architectural community has the unique opportunity to lead the way in reversing the destructive trend of human-induced climate change. They hold the key to the lock on the global thermostat. If they open the lock, and if the automobile industry likewise accepts its responsibility to increase gas mileage of its fleet, and if more states require that a percentage of their energy come from non-polluting renewable sources, then the US will have a viable strategy in place to combat global warming and restore its international goodwill and credibility. So I thank you all for letting me come to you and relay information from Ed Mazria. I hope that you guys take a look at some of his talks. He's on YouTube, and he's really got an honest and frank and very just easy to digest way of looking at climate change and architecture and how they relate to each other.
Great.